Good afternoon, everyone. I know we have a couple folks in here. We'll probably have some more folks trickling in. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I do want to name that this presentation is being recorded. It will live on. So for those of you who have colleagues who weren't able to join us this afternoon, you'll be able to share this link with them, which will be available by tomorrow to your networks and folks that you know that may be interested in this work. We're excited to have you join us for the official kickoff of the Tennessee Leaders for Equity Playbook. This is the version 2. The previous version was produced by the Tennessee ESSA leadership and learning community a couple years ago. That was a group of folks and leaders across the state that have been convened since 2016. And since that time period, they produced an original version of the playbook that was released in collaboration with the Tennessee Department of Education. Since then, that same group and new additions to that group, including myself, have been able to lean in and produce a revision of that playbook, adding some new equity commitments. And so today you're going to get an overview of the playbook, which includes the equity shifts that are included, equity commitments that are included, and then also what does that look like in practice, depending on where you are within a district, a community, or the role that you play in between the two. And then we're going to have a conversation with 2 equity leaders from the largest districts in the state of Tennessee and really dig into what does equity look like in their districts, what are they facing, how are they leveraging the playbook and some of its commitments, and what's to come in the future for these districts and these leaders. So without further ado, I'm going to actually introduce Dr. Jim McIntyre, who is the Dean of the College of Education at Belmont University, who's going to kick us off with an overview of the playbook and some of the insights that are included within it. They include the shifts from the equity shifts and the equity commitments. And I will turn it over to him, Dr. McIntyre.
Great. Thank you, Dr. George. I appreciate that, and delighted to be with you this afternoon to talk about the Tennessee Leaders for Equity Playbook. And I want to apologize up front for my headset. I'm at a point in my life where I've chosen functionality over style, but I want you to be able to hear me and for me to be able to hear the dialogue. So the Tennessee Leaders for Equity Playbook is a resource that was developed to really engender some conversation around educational equity here in the state of Tennessee, and hopefully to provide some practical strategies around how we can enhance equity and excellence in education here in the volunteer state. Before I dive into the details of the resource itself, of the playbook, I wanted to step back for a second and answer the question, why do we want to focus on educational equity here in Tennessee? And I think it's important to note that we've made a lot of progress here in the state of Tennessee in terms of student academic progress and success. Certainly COVID has had an influence on that and created some additional challenges. But if we want to sustain and deepen the progress that we've made over the past decade plus here in the state of Tennessee, all of our children need access, opportunity, instruction, and support that's needed to be successful in the classroom. We know that high-level learning and academic success for all of our kids is important for their future, but it's also really critical to the future vitality and flourishing of our communities and the state of Tennessee as a whole. And I would say that equity's sort of become a bit controversial. Educational equity in some realms has become a bit controversial. I really lament that, because I really think that we know here in the state of Tennessee, we have achievement and opportunity gaps that are defined by income, by race, by disability, by language, and sometimes by gender. And I think we can all agree we need to address those and overcome those gaps. And equity simply should be about making sure that we give all of our students the tools, the resources, and the support that they need to be successful in our classrooms and to ensure they have a bright future. I hope that's something we can all agree on. So the playbook is, this resource is the Tennessee Leaders for Equity Playbook. It's a resource created for educators, for parents, for school and district leaders, for community stakeholders and others. It's meant to provide a framework and some practical strategies to help embrace and enhance educational equity here in Tennessee. As Dr. George said, it's a resource that's been really thoughtfully developed by a team and actually pretty widely field tested as well. We got a lot of use and a lot of feedback from various constituencies, and we hope that this will really be a resource that facilitates dialogue and some action to ensure excellence in education for all of our kids here in Tennessee. I won't get too deep into this because Dr. George talked about the history of the playbook, but this is a resource that was supported by the Wallace Foundation, and a team of folks from across Tennessee worked to put together the original version of the playbook, the Tennessee Leaders for Equity playbook, in 2018. It has been substantially revised and expanded here in 2022. So let me talk a little bit about the structure of this resource itself, the structure of the playbook. So there are some major elements that are contained within the playbook itself. And the first is an action plan framework. So there is an opportunity to think about, in my school, in my district, in my community, what would an educational equity action plan look like? How can I use some data, look at data, think about how to plan for the future? And there's a framework that helps support that type of thinking around educational equity within the playbook itself. There's an equity shifts continuum. So this is really interesting. So within the playbook, it really articulates some of the misconceptions around educational equity that we hear sometimes and that we know exist. And it considers what would that look like if we actually shifted some of that thinking toward a more equity mindset, and what would that look like? And we hope there'll be great dialogue around some of those misconceptions and around how do we move to a more equitable mindset. And then the bulk of the playbook itself is really articulating 8 equity commitments. So these are some, what we want to do in order to enhance educational equity and excellence here in the state of Tennessee, and some suggestions around key actions for various constituencies so that we can live into those 8 equity commitments that we believe are really important for our future of educating students here in the state of Tennessee. A couple of definitions that exist within the playbook itself. So we within the playbook, definitions have been made for equity, what that looks like in the educational context, and also what a leader for equity might be. So in the field of education, the playbook defines equity as every student having access to effective teachers and the resources, experience, and rigor they need to be successful. And then for a leader of equity, what we mean when we talk about a leader for equity, it's someone who, works to eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps, to ensure success for all of our kids, and to do so in a couple ways: to identify and address personal and institutional bias and barriers, and then also to provide strategies to ensure that every student has access to effective educators, to learning opportunities, and to the resources and supports that they need to be successful. Again, the bulk of the resource itself, the Leaders for Equity playbook, is these 8 equity commitments. What can we do as leaders, and what should we do as leaders to make sure that we're providing an equitable and excellent education to all of our students? So there are 8 equity commitments. The first is to decrease chronic absenteeism. I'll talk a little bit more about that one in just a moment when I talk about some of the equity shifts that can occur. The second is to reduce disproportionate suspension and expulsion rates. So we know, again, here in the state of Tennessee, that we see disproportionalities in terms of student discipline that are sometimes defined by income, by race, by disability, by language, by gender, and in particular, that young men of color are suspended and expelled at disproportionate rates. So the playbook talks about this equity commitment, provides some data around the current state and the current situation, and then also suggests some action steps and strategies around how to address that and how to embrace this equity commitment of reducing disproportionality. The third equity commitment is around increasing early post-secondary opportunities. So we know we want to connect all students to their future, to think about what it might look like in terms of college and career, to make their present more relevant to the bright future that they might envision. So thinking about AP and IB and industry certifications and dual credit and dual enrollment type of opportunities for all students so that they can help envision that bright future. The fourth equity commitment is around providing equitable access to effective teachers. I'm going to talk more about that one in just a moment. I'll dig into that a bit. The fifth equity commitment is to recruit and retain a diverse teaching force. We know it's important, and we strive to make sure that our teaching core really better reflects the rich diversity here in the state of Tennessee, and in particular of our student population. The sixth equity commitment is to embed cultural competence in school practices. And again, the term cultural competence has become a little bit of a lightning rod, but it's, to me, that doesn't make sense, because cultural competence just means understanding our students' backgrounds, their experience, their culture, so we can do a better job teaching and supporting them and ensuring their success. The seventh equity commitment is to partner with community allies to make sure that we are inviting community organizations and nonprofits and businesses and parents and families to be a partner with us in this work of educational excellence and creating equitable opportunities. And then finally, the eighth equity commitment, educational equity commitment, is to allocate resources equitably. And again, I'll dig into a couple of examples, including this one here in just a moment. So I mentioned that part of the structure of the Tennessee Leaders for Equity Playbook is this notion of equity mind shifts. And so here's an example of one of those. So for each of the equity commitments, there's articulated a common misperception. And then what would that look like if it were actually shifted to an equity mindset? And so here's the example for equity commitment number one, which is to decrease chronic absenteeism. The common misconception is that some families value school less and don't believe in the importance of regular attendance than other families. And if we were to shift that to an equity mindset, it becomes about really believing and embracing the notion that all of our families value the importance of their children's education, and we understand that they can experience some conditions that negatively impact regular attendance. What that means is that when you make that shift to that equity mindset, you're shifting from a sort of a mindset of blame and where we don't believe that some families value education, to a recognition that all of our families, all of our parents wants what's best for their kids. And we can move to a mindset where we're working together, where we're collaborating, where we're identifying strategies that can overcome some of the barriers and obstacles to ensuring that students are in school. Because as the research indicates, and not surprisingly, when students are in school, they're much more likely to be successful academically and to have a brighter future. So that's an example of one of the equity mindset shifts, and there are 8 of them, one for each of the equity commitments in the playbook. I want to dig into a couple of the examples around the commitments themselves, just to give you a flavor of that and what it looks like. I really hope that you'll have a chance to download the document, to really look at the equity commitments and also the action items that are suggested. But let me talk about this to start with. So this is equity commitment number 4, which is to provide equitable access to effective teachers. And the commitment here is that leaders take action to minimize effective teaching gaps and to ensure students with the greatest needs have access to highly effective teachers. What does that mean, effective teaching gaps? Well, if you look at the graphic on the right-hand side here, what you see is that in the state of Tennessee, the data is a little bit older, it's from 2016, but it's recent enough to be very relevant, that in the state of Tennessee, sometimes the students who are struggling the most, our students who are scoring below basic or basic on our state assessment, are less likely to have access and be assigned a highly effective teacher in their classroom and than their peers who are scoring more in the proficient and advanced range. So we see that dynamic, and what the playbook suggests is a series of recommended actions for various constituencies. So whether you're a school leader, a family, or a community member, if you're on the school board, what are some suggested actions that you might be able to take that could work to address this particular challenge? And so, for example, I would point to this first bullet point under school leader actions. And the suggested action there is for school leaders to analyze multi-year data to develop strategies for recruiting and hiring highly effective teachers in the most high-need grades and areas of school. Now, no question, in the current environment, that is much easier said than done. But the point here is to be purposeful about recruitment and deployment of our talent within our schools to make sure we're addressing the needs of all of our students. I think if we're being real here, we know there's a dynamic in some of our schools where some of our highest performing educators, where some of our strongest educators sometimes gravitate toward some of our highest performing students. They say, I'd like to teach the AP English class, or I'd like to teach the honors course. Wouldn't it be great if we got to a place where our culture and our incentive structure said, when you're at the pinnacle of your career, when you are a truly outstanding educator, we're going to match you with some of the highest need in our schools. And that way, you're going to make an incredible difference in making sure that all of our students are successful. And that's going to be a tremendous legacy for you going forward. So those are the types of recommended actions and action steps that are included in the playbook and for consideration for various constituencies. And this is an example of one of the equity commitments. Another example is equity commitment number 8. And this is about allocating resources equitably. And the commitment here is about leaders taking action to allocate resources equitably in 3 ways. 1, to select and implement high quality instructional materials. 2, to leverage technology tools. And 3, by differentiating fiscal resources. And again, there's some data here. So what this data tells us is that, unfortunately, in the state of Tennessee, the per pupil revenues and expenditures in some of our highest poverty districts are not that dissimilar from the per pupil spending in some of our more affluent districts. You would have thought perhaps that in some of our highest poverty districts, we'd be making substantially more investment to make sure that kids who are living in poverty have the resources and the supports they need to be successful. But we're not seeing that in the data here in the state of Tennessee. And so what can we do to think about some action steps that might address the equitable allocation of resources and making sure that those are distributed equitably? So again, the playbook suggests some action steps, some items that school district leaders, that school boards and community members might be able to take to address this. I think we're at a moment in time here in Tennessee where we have an extraordinary opportunity around how we allocate resources equitably. We are moving as a state to TISA, which is the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement, which really allows the state to allocate dollars from the state to districts based on student characteristics and student learning needs, and that those dollars are going to follow the students based on their need. And doesn't that allow us a great opportunity at the district level, at the school level, at the classroom level, to think about how we allocate resources based on student needs and to really embrace this notion of an equitable allocation of resources for all of our kids? The last thing I'll say before we wrap up and move to our panel discussion is about sort of the guiding principles around the playbook and what it looks like. So the playbook is really meant to be a flexible support tool for schools, for districts, for classrooms, for community leaders. We hope that it will really foster some reflection and conversation around some of these misconceptions and how those can be shifted to an equity mindset so that we're really well prepared and well positioned to be able to embrace some of the strategies and action items that are suggested in the playbook to really address educational equity here in the state of Tennessee. And I think it's important to note that the playbook is meant to help examine the current context and existing challenges, but also to utilize current resources. There's not a suggestion in the playbook that, we need to, budget much more money or things like that. It's really about how do we focus our time, effort, energy, resources? How do we engage the community in some of these conversations in ways that will enhance educational equity and excellence? And then finally, I think that, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's this framework of using an educational equity action plan. So the playbook suggests looking at data, that there's a needs assessment, and then picking and choosing which of these strategies that are suggested, which of these equity commitments are going to be most impactful, most productive, most important right away. You don't have to, there's not a suggestion that you embrace all 8 of these equity commitments on day one, but to pick and choose for your context, for your school, for your district, for your community, what's going to work best, so that hopefully all of our students will receive an equitable and excellent education here in the state of Tennessee. I've spoken very quickly, but I wanted to give you a flavor of the Tennessee Leaders for Equity Playbook. There's a QR code here that you can put your camera to and download a copy of the playbook. And I know Dr. George will put some more information in that will allow you to download some of these resources. But we hope that this resource, this Tennessee Leaders for Equity Playbook, will help and really engender some great conversation and also help us to identify some strategies to really enhance equity and excellence here in the state of Tennessee. I look forward to the great conversation to follow with this extraordinary panel of equity experts here in the state of Tennessee. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. McIntyre. We appreciate you giving such a comprehensive overview of the playbook. As you were talking, we actually dropped the link in the chat for the playbook. That link will directly allow you to download it to your computers. So please, please, please use the link, share it with other folks in your networks, and make sure you get a copy of the playbook. We're now going to shift gears and we're going to go into a conversation. I think it's extremely important that, considering, equity being such a huge topic of conversation in many education ecosystems locally within the state, but as in the state as a whole and across the globe, that we center folks who are on the ground doing the work. Sometimes they work at the highest levels in the districts that they're serving. And so I have the pleasure of being joined with two of my friends and colleagues, I would say, that are leading this work at a high level with two of the largest districts in the state of Tennessee, for that matter. I'm joined this afternoon with Ashford Hughes, who is the Chief Equity Officer for Metro-Nashville Public Schools, the second largest school district in the state of Tennessee, and Dr. Michael Lowe, who is Director of Equity and Access for Memphis-Shelby County Schools, which is the largest school district in the state of Tennessee. Welcome, both of you gentlemen. I appreciate you sharing time, and I know your schedules are busy, but we appreciate the opportunity to be able to learn from you this afternoon. I am going to also enable live transcription too, just as well, just in case we have folks who need to take advantage of that to be able to follow the conversation. And then also, I didn't introduce myself, but I figured, the people may have caught my name or on the fly, whatever, but I'm Darius George. I'm the Executive Director of the Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance. Excited to be able to host this kickoff and dive into this conversation. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Question for both of you gentlemen, and we'll start with Ashford and we'll move over to Dr. Lowe. Just considering everything that's occurred over the last 2 years, we've experienced the challenges of a global pandemic, unfinished learning within districts with our students, racial violence broadly across the country. What are the biggest equity issues that are taking place in your districts, and what are the proposed solutions to those?
Hey, first, thank you for having us on, Darius. Proud to be here to talk about some of these important issues. When we think about what our community has faced over the years, I'm gonna really start with the first thing that we began to look at was finding our students and families and making certain that we reconnected with our students and families, right? Not only right before COVID hit, Nashville had a tornado that came through. So we had multiple things that were going on within our community. But one of the first things our superintendent said was we need to double down on our social emotional learning practices, but we also need to set up what we call now our navigator program. So across all of our 132 schools, we have a program where there is a caring individual that is tied to calling a student at least once a week, not about his academic progress, not about what's going on in the classroom, but checking in to say, hey, how you doing today? What's going on at home? Can I help you? You need some support. And each individual at our schools have a certain number of students that they call and contact just to check in with folks, right? That was one of the first things that we really began to see as an inequity. We didn't know where our students were through all this process. Second thing we found out was access and opportunity, or lack thereof. We had to make certain that all of our students had access to laptops. That took finances. That took actually organizing to get those to the 80,000+ students that we have within our district. But not also just the laptops. Not every family had access to Wi-Fi and internet. So we had to make certain that we had them opportunities to get connected to be able to do the work, right? To be able to make certain that they didn't get too far behind. And this was something that had never been done before in our district, going completely virtual, right? Because of health. So that was something. We also talk about the inequities around access to talented and gifted programs, to advanced academics. We saw those numbers increase. So that's why we started to put in place mechanisms along with our own equity roadmap. What are our plans day in and day out to make certain that we're not just putting kids in these programs just to get better numbers? What are we doing to make certain that they're in these programs, they're prepared and ready to excel and be successful in these programs? But that was vitally important. For us, we could just look at the numbers. And the third thing we looked at was literacy rates. Literacy, particularly for our Black and brown boys and girls. Because when we look at those state test scores, when we look at some of the scores that we were seeing, our Black and brown students were, when we looked at national norms, were in the low to mid 30s, where our white counterparts, our Asian students were in the high 60s, if not 70. So we know that literacy is really the guide in the forefront to equity within our school buildings to make certain that students are on track. So we had to double down on a program, what we call literacy reimagining, looking at how we coach up our literacy coaches to give better instruction to our educators, making certain that our new literacy program, as we call it, the Wit and Wisdom program, how do we make certain that that's implemented with fidelity across all of our schools, that it's implemented with the same consistency, and there's accountability that we are doing what's necessary to get these particular readers up where they need to be. The last thing that I talk about was really connecting with teachers and recruitment and the retention of teachers, and not just teachers, but support staff, bus drivers, and recruiting diverse teachers. You know, our district is made up around 70% of our students are Black or brown, but 80% of our teachers are white, majority white women. And we have literally less than 1% of Hispanic teachers when 30% of our students are Hispanic or Latinx. So we had to double down, work with organizations like TECA, national organizations, our local HBCUs, to figure out ways that we can recruit and retain teachers of color so that we can have those culturally literate, culturally responsive individuals in the classroom in order to help us move the needle for our students of color.
Wow, powerful, powerful. Thank you, Ashford, for sharing. Would love to learn more from what's going on in Memphis-Shelby County School District, Dr. Lowe.
Yes, again, thank you, everybody. We are just delighted for the opportunity. Glad to be in the service one more time. Glad to be here. And just from some of the same things, just to echo what Mr. Hughes just said, one of the first challenges we had was just really just looking at our teachers coming back. As you know, Memphis-Shelby County Schools, we stayed closed probably the longest in the state. So we had to really recalibrate our teachers' thinking around. Some of them have been teaching from their bonus room, from their kitchen, from their coffee table. So getting them reacclimated, and also some of them we hired their first year teaching. So we had to make sure and tier our teachers and make sure they understood the expectation coming back into the school year, the lesson planning aspect, also knowing that it's different teaching from a computer screen to now having your first classroom, your first class, your first what we call whiteboard. All of these things were new for some of our brand new teachers, and helping them understand that we are here. We do have what we call a Memphis-Shelby County Cares Committee, and these are things just to have our teachers learn and also grow on our time. We found that many of our teachers working other jobs, we had to give them professional development opportunities where they can learn during the school day. So providing substitutes, letting them come down to central office and learn on our time and not after school. That was one thing we had to get them back in. Next thing too would be on the front of reclaiming, retaining, and engaging our students. That was another thing, going out in the community, going back, having our lead by listening tours, asking our students how they were feeling about school. We had an equity survey where we asked about their sense of belonging. And we found that during the pandemic, and we're still in it post-pandemic, and many of our students only had about 32% that said they felt connected to an adult in their building. So we prioritized when the students came back in using that metric from Panorama. We took a fall and a spring survey, and we were working tremendously hard on trying to make them feel connected to an adult. Because as you know, some of them, I don't know about you, but that spring break we went out and I thought we were coming back to school and we didn't come back. Some of those students, the last time they closed the locker, they were in 5th grade. When we came back to school, they were in 7th grade. So it's a 2-year jump. So we had to just reclaim, retain them, and also make programs where they felt as if not only the after school programs, but touching them during the school day, making sure that we knew they had a teacher in that classroom that was going to reach out, that was going to also keep the parents engaged, not sending emails, not just calling, but making sure they were touching base with the student every single day. Those are the 2 big issues that we had in Memphis-Shelby County. And even now, we're faced with crime has gone up, and there's been a lot of pointing fingers in our city about juvenile chronic absenteeism. Many of our students have been out. That's one of our equity commitments. But chronic absenteeism, because many of those students got used to being at home. So we had to go out. We had to make sure. I went on some wellness checks with our school resource officers, knocked on doors. And we had some kids that came back to school just because they heard, hey, they're coming out doing wellness checks with law enforcement. Not that you're in trouble, but you hadn't been in school and you hadn't logged in. So those are some of the things that we had to do, make wellness checks and try to decrease those chronic absenteeism rates, which right now they're relating every child out of school to a car getting broken into, a crime. And we're trying to get that narrative out of our school system.
Wow. It seems like both of you gentlemen, obviously, and the work that you're leading in your district is extremely important, but you got some challenges, but it seems like you also are doing the necessary works to dispel some of the myths and also curb some of the inequities and some of the issues that you're having. So definitely appreciate both of y'all for sharing. I also want to invite the audience, as you're listening, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function to submit questions. We will have a Q&A section, a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of the conversation. You could also drop your question in the chat too as well, if that's more convenient for you. I want to build on the previous on that previous question and just the ideal of the playbook in general. I'm curious of which equity commitment resonates with you the most and why, taking into consideration all the things that you named, the challenges, and then even some of the solutions that you named. I'm curious how you can connect that to the equity commitments, at least one of them. We'll start with we'll start with Ashford and go to Dr. Lowe.
You should, go ahead, Dr. Lowe. I started first last time.
Okay, well, I know for us right now, equity and access, increasing those post-secondary learning opportunities is very important for us. The statement is said that when my mom, I'm gonna tell you this, my mother, when we have holidays and when we have people over, she pulls out the best silverware. She pulls out the leaf for the table. We have the tablecloths. I know we're about to have a good meal. And I've been telling our teachers and administrators, our children know what you think about them by what you serve. So looking at what kind of lessons are we serving our students? What kind of access are we giving them to rigorous curriculum? Giving them opportunities to be automatically enrolled in some of our honors and advanced courses when we know they are showing through their test scores and their grades that they qualify. That's one of the biggest things, increasing that post-secondary awareness, plugging them in to where they need to be in those classes. So it's very important to have that going. I also understand that for us, we have to make sure that when we increase those post-secondary opportunities, we have the correct teachers in those classes. So making sure we went about getting, we went to the state, we had some extra Algebra 1 classes that we're adding to certify our middle school and high school teachers to take on an extra class to make sure we introduce Algebra 1 in 8th grade. So providing that early post-secondary readiness courses for our children is very important.
Man, I'm gonna piggyback off a little bit, but may slide in a different direction. So for me, what resonates with me is kind of one that might lead to the other. But we've been focused over the summer on embedding cultural competence in all aspect of school practices, particularly around curriculum and instruction with our teachers. This past summer, our school superintendent mandated that all of our staff, all of our certified teaching staff had to go through a full day, 6 hours worth of social emotional learning training, but also diversity, equity, and inclusion foundation training. That's looking at implicit bias, how we show up in the classroom, but also how do we look at our cultural wealth as asset-based, right? How do we look at pedagogy as being equitable, which is vitally important. And we know if students feel connected to the work, then they'll show up to the classroom. So then I go to the absenteeism, right? And I think one feeds off of the other. But we have been focused really on how do we make certain that many of our students who are telling us, I don't feel connected in the class. I don't feel like my teacher understands me or my community. Again, coming off the height of George Floyd, coming off the height of what's taking place in Nashville over the last several years, right? Students wanted to feel connected, and they felt like their teacher, who sometimes didn't look like them, who they may never see in the community, didn't understand them. So we wanted to take all of our teachers through this professional learning. And we know that we can't PD our way out of inequities, but we can begin to lay foundations and open and shift mindsets so that educators can begin to reflect. How do I show up when I'm introducing this lesson with this class? How do I utilize different terminology? How do I utilize different books to get this lesson to differentiate the supports and the instruction I give to these students? So that was something that we've doubled down on and still have a long way to go. We'll be working on training our support staff, which is all of our department leaders, on that same type of training and understanding, because we know everything kind of begins at the top. And if we set those expectations about this is how we're going to operate, then we strongly believe that it will begin to filter into everything we do, and especially within our school communities. And if we have strong instruction taking place, if we have our teachers that know every student, and our superintendent has coined every student known, then we will begin to see positive reinforcement around absenteeism. Now, absenteeism is vitally important. But as we began to dissect and look at the data, we saw large absentee numbers within our first graders and our kindergartners. Now, everybody on this thread and everybody that's watching today knows that they can't drive themselves to school. So that's why we had to double down and figure out other strategies to make certain that what can we do for our younger students if it's not just about curriculum to get them in the school building. It's hard for me to pick just one. So if I had to pick 1 and 1A, those would be the two that I go with that resonate with me based off of the work that we're trying to accomplish right now.
Thank you for sharing. I mean, obviously, both of you naming, addressing cultural competency as well as post-secondary opportunities for our students is extremely, extremely important. And as you've articulated, there's an overlap there. Like in the addressing of one, there's opportunities where you may be able to also see some of these other equity commitments show up in the work too as well. I want to pivot and shift here and bring up a question that's more specific to your experiences. So both of you serve as equity officers for the 2 largest districts in Tennessee. So reflecting on the playbook, your professional experience, the best practices that you've either garnered or you witnessed throughout this work, what advice do you have for our audience as to how they can leverage the playbook as a resource to drive equity in their districts, their communities, or their schools? And we'll start with Ashford and then move to Dr. Lowe this time.
First, I think it's very, very important to say that the playbook is just that. It's a toolkit of choices, of guidance, and opportunities. Do not use the playbook. We have an equity roadmap. Do not use anything as a stagnant set of strategies that you must follow line A to get to B to Z and go through the whole thing, right? Breathe through it all. This equity work is not easy. Prepare to read it, prepare to be an active learner, learn together, but prepare to take one step at a time. Focus on what the data is telling you is most important piece for your school district. Our school districts are heavily diverse. our school district, we have over 46 different languages spoken, 42 different countries of origin within our community. So we know that cultural competency is important. In some of our rural areas, it might be recruiting teachers. It might be partnering with community allies. All of these issues around the playbook are vitally important. Do not feel like you have to take all at once, but be prepared that this work will not be easy, and be prepared to have honest conversations with your leadership. Be prepared to make sure to utilize this and have a community conversation around the equity playbook, right? Because our community is vitally important in the success of our schools. When we were first talking about what are some of the major inequities, this is outside of what we see in the school building, but an inequity is that everybody is placing all the solving of every juvenile issue on the schools, much of which is what students are coming in with in the external environment, from gentrification, from economics, right? We cannot in the school district solve for everything. So do not try to solve everything by utilizing this playbook. Take a look at the data, then go and look at what can I do from a personal perspective, what can we do as a system, and then what can we do as a community to bring elements of this playbook to life over time. But start somewhere. Don't try to take it all in, but be prepared to do the hard work that this entails.
Yeah, I echo those sentiments. We have to look at, in my experience, a lot of times we put comfort over justice, but we really need to put justice over comfort. And so one of the things I know for our school district is we have to begin looking at data, but the data has been saying what it's been saying for years. But for some, we try to intellectualize data, we try to intellectualize equity work. We know where the poorest areas of town are. We know where the most underestimated students are. The question is, how are you going to respond and how are you going to act? And I use the example, when people say they love the environment, then they recycle. When people say they're vegetarian or they want to eat healthy, they're vegan, they don't buy leather, they eat whole foods, they shop different places. So your actions are going to show me what you believe. You can't talk, I'm about equity, I'm about commitment, and in your school, you serve a predominantly Black and brown population, but yet only a few of them are in the most advanced courses. You can't tell me you're for equity and inclusion and you continuously treat parents or don't call certain parents, or you only hire certain teachers. So your data, what you believe, and your actions are going to show us. So in my path and the work that we've done in Memphis County, the same way we think about what we've done in the work in Nashville, we got to work with our teaching community. Working on the policy side is one of the biggest things I've learned. We can do a lot of talk and a lot of webinars and a lot of books. And this book is a guide, but we got to get into the policy side of things and start changing some of those lobbyists, some of those laws that have been passed. We got to get some people up in Nashville and across the state of Tennessee to say, hey, let's revisit this. Let's amend this. Let's get a policy that states, we're going to hold funding from you if you're not trying to actively recruit a diverse set of teachers. We're gonna look at how do we pay off teacher debt as far as school and going to school, and it pay for teachers to go and get advanced coursework. So these are some of the actions that we have to take in getting our boards involved if we're really going to be committed to this and not just be a part of just putting things in a protocol or book. It's got to live and breathe outside of paper.
Darius, I'm gonna just add for this webinar perspective, while many of our rural communities may not have a large Black or brown population, there is inequities. There is an inequitable divide between class. And I've seen it as I worked in rural communities before as well. So look at it through that lens, right? How do you shift the narrative around that? But you got to get started. And I think we as a state have to decide we are going to be champions for children. And that means many of us are going to have to put our privilege on the line and continue to fight for what is right, no matter what may be coming from other areas or what they may be saying we should be teaching. Nobody knows our communities like we know our communities, like we know our schools, right? So that's why when we hear all this national noise, we have to pivot back to what is going to help our students excel where we are on the ground. And I think this is an avenue that folks can get methods from, that they can learn from to really push where they are now if they really truly want to be champions for children.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I appreciate the comments and the insight that y'all share. We also got some questions in the chat. So those of you that are in the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer function or drop them in the chat box. I'm going to ask one more question because I want to make sure we have time to answer these questions. They are actually good questions that your perspectives, particularly in the areas that you're serving, may be able to provide some insight for our audience. But one last question for you. I'm curious of what's next for your district. So as we think about, everything that we've experienced, where we are now in this new academic year, 22-23, curious of what new initiatives, programs, or actions your districts may be taking or focusing on this academic year that will lead to a shift in equity within the district. Love to start with Dr. Lowe first and then work our way to Ashford, and then we'll dive into questions from the audience.
And you rephrase that question, what are our districts doing, you said, to address equity?
Yeah, so what are any new initiatives, programs, or actions that your district may be taking to shift equity? So obviously you named a couple of things earlier on, but is there anything that's a primary focus this year? And is there any programmatic things associated with our initiatives that align with it?
Well, we did, Darice and everybody listening, one thing our school district did, we paid an outside researcher to conduct an equity audit for the district. And in that equity audit, they went across the city in regions, north, south, east, and west. They looked at TVAS, they looked at teacher retention, insight culture, they looked at GPA, ACT, and one more, they looked at teacher licensure. I may have said that, but spreading that data out, we kind of every year, we have what we call equity stat sessions, and the different departments strategize around those areas. We cut up the pie. So this year, our focus was on GPA, our focus was on ACT, and also our focus was on teacher retention or teacher, what we call culture. And one of the key indicators we're focused on right now is my school is a great place to teach and learn. So we're monitoring that data weekly, but those are some of the initiatives that we have, and it's just a cyclical looking at data processes, and in between, we're making sure schools have scheduling in place, teachers have collaborative planning, time to learn. We have equity champions where those teachers are released during the school day, and they come, they get fed breakfast and lunch, and we have various modules in partnership with the University of Memphis to go over different modules on the school to prison pipeline. We have one series on bias from the book by psychologist Jennifer Eberhardt, and we go in and have those modules, and the teachers get also professional learning credit. So those are types of things we're doing during the school day, trying to help people learn, getting them credit. And it is 5% of their evaluation, part of their evaluation that we have here in our system, qualitative part. But we're just continuing. We're not going to stop. As I tell people, we are falling in love with the problem of educational equity. And as long as we fall in love with the problem, we'll be forever on a mission to solve for it. So falling in love with the problem and staying the course on some of those things, and just using the data and training not only our teachers, but starting with our cabinet level and working our way down.
So I'm fortunate enough that we have our director of schools, Dr. Adrian Battle, that has made it, as she became leader, that we were going to not just talk the talk of equity, but we were actually going to walk the walk, fund it, and make certain that it is known this is the way we're going to move in our district. That's why she coined every student known in that work. One of the first things that when I came on board was begin to assess and look at the data, look at past practices and programs we had done, and we need to create a guide map for our own district. So we cultivated our own equity roadmap, really looking at doing one of two things. One, breaking down silos. We know transformation, and this is where I think this is complete across any district. We know that transformation begins with social emotional learning, equitable practices, and then great teaching and learning. But oftentimes those three things were working separately, silo, right? We began to issue initiatives and focus planning and design work with all three of those departments together, so that the end result was all of those are connected. And it wasn't just that the senior cabinet saw that they were connected, principals saw they were connected, teachers saw they were connected, cafeteria workers saw they were connected. So there was no disengagement. So that is why we're still working to make certain that comes across in every training that we do, in every webinar that we host, in every professional learning session series that we lead. We always have those three areas of focus highlighted collectively, showing a direct through line between each and every one to make certain that every student is known, so that we can increase access to opportunities for our boys and girls. The next thing we started to look at was, how do we have better family engagement? And not just family engagement, how do we have better family and community partnerships? Oftentimes we ended up in the past, you have a hot dog event, you have a potluck, but did that really make families feel connected to their students' learning? So we have put out, and we'll begin our family university here within the next couple of months, really highlighting how we better connect with families over time. Forgive me. The last thing I want to talk about, I saw in the chat, but we also have an equity assessment. How are we looking when we go and visit schools, when we're partnering and learning with leaders? How do we assess the way that they're teaching and their instruction? How do we assess to make certain that their problems of practice, that their instructional leadership teams have an equity lens that they utilize when making decisions and when teaching and going through their scope and sequence of learning? These are things that we are just now initiating, but we don't do it in a silo. Ashford Hughes, as the executive director for equity and inclusion, cannot have his own separate set of programs and mechanisms and metrics. They have to be embedded in our district-wide focused outcomes, again, to show that equity lives in everybody's work. So again, we're just now really starting our race, right? I've been in this district doing this work for about 2.5 years now. We are just starting this race, but we're starting it in a place of action and not just talk. Hopefully, when I work myself out of a job and now it becomes embedded where you don't need an equity leader, then we can have sustainability, because it is an expectation across department, across school buildings, in every classroom, that we lead with a different lens. And that lens is looking at how do we differentiate data, differentiate supports for those students that need it the most right now. And I think because we have support from the top, and the expectation has been set from the top, that expectation is leveled all the way down to everybody in the classroom. Still have a long way to go, because shifting mindsets doesn't happen overnight. But again, we wanted to start someplace. So our equity roadmap was one of our first places to start to really kick that off.
Thank you so much for both of y'all sharing that information, particularly around the equity roadmap. I had seen when you posted it on LinkedIn and had got a chance to review it a little while ago. So appreciate you diving in there and providing a little more context of how it even came to be. We do want to shift and answer a couple of questions. We have about 5 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll take the last minute to wrap up, give Dr. Lowe the opportunity to wrap up and share some more information with us. I'm going to go to the question and answer function. We got a question from Dr. Finch, Dr. Darcy Finch, who's at Belmont at the teacher residency situated there. Her question is, how are the districts supporting teachers as Tennessee bans certain books that may reflect the students being taught? What have we seen or what have we said to teachers as we discuss how to be more culturally responsive? And this question could go to either one or both of you if you have responses for them.
Well, I will say what we have done, we do required by the state. We are required to review all of our textbooks in the school libraries and the classroom libraries. So the teachers have been reviewing those, and we have to post all of those books on our district webpage. But we do know under the acceptable concepts under that PC 493 that historical documents, we still tell our teachers historical documents are acceptable. Impartial discussions of controversial aspects of history are still acceptable. And the impartial instruction on the historical oppression of a particular group of people that's based on a race or ethnicity or class, nationality, religion, or geographic region, that's still permissible. So we say stick to the curriculum, stick to the facts, don't bird walk, present both sides, be planned, always collaborate with your other departments. But again, we're not trying to teach anyone to present lessons that are oppressive or cruel. We're trying to teach both of our histories through an impartial lens and stay with the documents. You can't argue with the historical documents that are in our textbooks, and stay with the curriculum that we have. There's enough already written in our curriculum that we can use if we study and teach it right. But no teacher should be under the impression that they cannot use what is in the curriculum, which is a lot about the civil rights movement, the history of the Ku Klux Klan, and many of our standards. But again, they have to plan. They can't shoot from the hip, and they must be ready for questions that may come, but also always study the plan and the text and the curriculum. But right now we are supporting them with reviewing classroom materials. And we do know about the complaints that can be sent in. But again, course of instruction, a unit of academic instruction, which includes a series of lessons or meetings designed to meet specific educational goals. All of those things are permissible. But anytime you're making one group feel guilty, we say stay away from that. Anytime you're teaching one group that a race is superior, we stay away from that. Anytime we're talking about a meritocracy and you're making people feel uncomfortable talking about a meritocracy, we say stay away from those things. So stay in the curriculum, know your topic, know your content, and also you have to be an artisan of your craft. A good teacher is an artist. So they have to understand who they're speaking to and who they are. But that's what we've been telling, and that's how we've been instructing our teachers. And our curriculum has been viewed and vetted. And if they stay with the lessons that we all have, they will be just fine.
One thing, if anything else I have to add on to that, we tell our teachers the same thing: follow the scope and sequence. You know, when you got to send stuff out to parents and let them know what the lesson will look like. But the most important thing, as we went over this summer with our teachers, when in doubt, ask. When in doubt, call me, call our social studies director, and let's have a conversation. You should never feel like you can't go to somebody and ask if you're unsure, right? Just to be on the safe side. That's vitally important. And we still have many teachers that will connect and ask, hey, I'm a little hesitant about this, but everything that Dr. Lowe just said is the same thing that we tell our teachers as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. There is one other room for one more question. It was a question that was the direct message to me. I'm going to ask it. But the question situates, how would you suggest leaders get past some of the rhetoric and noise that sometimes comes with the equity work and get to the substance of supporting all students in their success?
Well, I think it's about coming into what we say, coming into the space of our children. And education is more than just having a backpack and a pencil and being quiet. Equity work goes into whose grass gets cut, who's in the front office, whose hands, and what questions get answered when a child raises their hand in class. How does the bathroom smell? What is served at lunch? There's so many equitable issues that can be viewed, and it's not just looking at some type of critical race theory curriculum. It's in everything that we do when a child enters the door. Why do we staff one school on this side of town better than the other? Why do we send certain people to these school graveyards for principals? Why do we hire the way we hire? All of it is in our hiring practices. It's in the way our buildings look. It's in the way our schools and our patterns are shifted. So equity work is vital work, getting to the heart of helping the most underestimated students in Tennessee: Black, brown, free and reduced lunch, homeless, All of these areas, all of these areas can be addressed, but it's very important to look at it from a wider lens and just keep falling in love with the problem.
Thanks so much for sharing. And we want to go ahead and just thank both Dr. Lowe and Ashford for their insight, their perspectives, and their leadership in their various districts that they're in. Thank you for a very, very, very comprehensive and insightful conversation. And I'm going to transition to Dr. Lowe as we close out for today. Thank you, audience, for your time. We have one more quick announcement and some closing remarks. And we thank you for spending your evening with us / afternoon.
As we go forward, Dr. McIntyre, you want to say one more thing? Okay, well, what we have on the screen here, these are the dates. This is our kickoff, and we're having our equity module for the playbook. These are our module release dates. As we have there, September 23rd, we'll release module 1. It's an equity overview and key terms. We're going into October 14th, module 2 will be released. And the dates are there. I'm not going to read all those dates to you, but those are the dates. We will wrap up all modules by the end of December. December 23rd will be the 10th module. So we'll look at reviewing recommended key actions and resources. And this is for our Tennessee Leaders for Equity Playbook. This is our scope from September through December. Stay tuned for more sites. We're going to have this loaded, have a YouTube channel. But again, we'll be releasing these modules in increments. And our first module 1 will be completed by September 23rd for all of those to view as we walk through this wonderful playbook. And this is our resource for educational equity in Tennessee. Thank you, Dyrese, and everyone. We thank you for having this time with us, for being with us, for taking your time to learn. Iron sharpens iron, but let's continue to be leaders for educational equity. Invite your communities, and let's continuously fall in love with the problem of educational equity in Tennessee. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you so much. Great job.